Welcome to the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast from Never Too Late Cafe. I'm your host, Laura Womack. Each week, we sit down for a chat with someone just like you, someone who had an idea, a passion, a dream, or sometimes just a thought, and planted that seed, watched it grow into something they wanted to share with the world. If you have an idea for a topic or someone that would be a guest for the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, where you can join our Never Too Late Cafe Facebook group. We'd love to hear from you. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Megan B. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Laura. Thanks so much for having me on.
So can we start by you telling me where you currently live?
Yeah, I live down in Southeast Ohio in Athens, Ohio. Well, just a little outside of Athens, but Athens County.
Okay. And that's a big college town, isn't it?
Yeah, Ohio University is there, so that, about half the population is the university. So when school's not in session, it feels like a very small town. And when it is, we're very aware that school's in session. There's a lot of young folks.
So where are you from originally?
I grew up in Ottawa County, Northwest Ohio, east of Toledo, up by Lake Erie, out in the very flat farmlands of Ohio, the old drained Black Swamp region. It's a great place for bird watching. There's a lot of wildlife refuges and just nature spots up there along the lake, which were a big part of my childhood.
Cool. So you are a musician.
Yeah.
And we're going to just dive right into your story about how that all started. So when did you start learning that you wanted to sing or started singing?
I mean, as a kid, I always had an interest in singing. I think, as kids, we're often just excited about creative endeavors, and then it gets kind of sucked out of you at some point. I was really into singing. I never wanted to be in front of people, but I, like, when I was in first grade, got pegged for like a solo in the Christmas pageant. But I was like, I like singing, but I don't want to do it in front of everybody. But I did it, and it was fine. And then sang some in the church, and it was just a little too much for me. Like, it was fun for me, but I didn't like the performance angle of it. And I was singing songs somebody else picked out. And so it wasn't, I did it and I knew I had a talent for it, but it wasn't something I thought I would ever do professionally. And I always wrote also. So I've always been into journaling and poetry, and I would write songs in my head, which I just thought everybody did. And when I was a teenager, I had this pickup truck that didn't have a radio in it. So when I would drive around, I would just sing my own songs, and I just never shared them with anybody. And then when I moved down to Southeast Ohio to go to college, to go to Hocking College and study ecotourism. And through that, I started working at camps and environmental education centers, and got exposed to more of the organic, fun angle of singing. Not the choir, not the performance, just the around the campfire, very fun, very raucous, in the dining hall, singing with kids kind of environment. And then after I graduated college, I was still working at camps. And so I would work spring, summer, fall, running the education program. And then in the winter, I would have time off. And I started this habit of going south and escaping the Ohio winters. And I would just travel. I would travel south and west and volunteer on organic farms all over the country. And then kind of when spring rolled back around, I would come back and work at camp. But on one of these trips out west, I ended up, my car broke down, and I ended up in a car with a couple other friends I knew. And we were kind of traveling around, and we ended up way out in the desert outside of Death Valley and to this wilderness area. And we found some folks camped around this like wilderness region, and around the campfire, these folks were passing a guitar around and singing. And I really fell in love out there with just the very organic, alive, impassioned, in the middle of nowhere kind of music and how it pulled everybody from the surrounding campsites together. We all came together for music. And so I loved it. My friends had to leave after a couple days, and I just said, just leave me here. I'll find my way out when it's time. And I stayed for a month and hung out around those campfires. And eventually somebody said, you love to sing and you love to write. Why don't you learn to play guitar? And I was 22 at the time, and I was like, I can do that. And somebody put a guitar in my hands and showed me a few chords, and then I sang one of the songs that I had written in my head, and then they showed me how to play it on guitar, and all of a sudden it was like, wow, now I have this vehicle to play these songs that I had that I thought just like maybe weren't important or were embarrassing, or I didn't want to just sing them a cappella. And then with a guitar, it seemed like I was playing with something and I had that support. And then I just was hooked. It changed my whole life and my whole plan of life and career. I would still do education stuff and naturalist work, but music slowly became more intertwined and more of my focus in what I was doing with my life.
So, kind of go back a little bit, the ecotourism that you studied, I guess I've not known how that really translated into life. I've seen the topic, but it's more than organic farms and camps. Is when you studied that, what does that entail? Because that's another aspect of you. That's definitely another aspect of you. You're very nature oriented and out there. So
yeah, I'm out there. I just
in a good way. I'm sorry.
it is a good thing. It's more any kind of ecotourism is any kind of tourism that has a nature-based element and an education-based element and a sustainability element. So it could be a whitewater rafting guide. It could be somebody leading hikes. It could be a camp, an educational program. It could be somebody leading bird watching guides down in Costa Rica. Anything sustainable, educational, and environmental. It's that kind of work. A farm could be ecotourism if there's a tourism element. If people are coming to the farm to tour it and work on it and learn about farming, that could also be ecotourism.
Very interesting. I just, it's one of those questions I wanted to ask somebody.
Yeah.
So, for you, which comes first, the lyrics or the melody tune, that part, the music part?
It's funny, a lot of people ask that, but it could be either. I think I'm pretty flexible in my process. So sometimes it's just a little phrase. But oftentimes, when I teach songwriting, I like to help people understand that words are lyrics. Language is musical. We speak with a rhythm and we speak with a pace and we speak with a tone, and we can convey so much by the way we say something. And so it's the same with the way we sing. And so I may have a phrase, and depending on what words I enunciate or really put emphasis on, that's going to change the whole meaning of the phrase. And so I think, especially with folk music, we're just taking the language of the words and accentuating them. So it's already in there. Like if there's a lyric, the music's already in there for me.
I didn't realize you taught. Awesome.
That's a huge part of what I do. I have taught a lot of kids programs. I've kind of evolved my background in environmental education more into music. And sometimes it's a little bit environmental too. I'll be at a camp and work with kids outdoors, and then we'll kind of take our experiences and what we've learned and studied and appreciated about the outdoor world, and then help the kids write songs from that space, from what they learned, so they can kind of internalize it and have some expression of their creativity and appreciation. So I do a lot with kids. I work at the local libraries and we'll do songwriting and music and do a lot of after school programs. And then I also work with a lot of adults. I started a program called Words in the Hills which is a writing retreat for adults. And it's for writers of any kind. We do some songwriting, but we'll do poetry. And this year it's in the spring. It's at Camp Odioko, where I started my first internship in working with environmental education. So we're using this beautiful space in the Hocking Hills and camping out for a 3-day retreat together. And this year, our keynote speaker is this woman, Sherry Flick from Pittsburgh, who is a fiction writer. And she's also an urban gardener and writes about food. So she's teaching some food writing and like tapping into how food triggers memory. And she's teaching some flash fiction and some fiction critique. And then we're doing poetry and songwriting and nature writing. And then just having some time around the campfire and having an open mic and doing some hiking and all that stuff too. So I love to teach. It's such a passion of mine. I just did a after school program with some kids down in Parkersburg, West Virginia last week. And we do a lot of brainstorming and they come up with ideas, and it's a collaborative thing. And then at the end of the 2 hours, we have written and recorded a song. So I love being able to help other people find their spark and create something and find an outlet for what they feel and what they think.
Wow, that's a lot of different avenues. And so let's go back to the Words in the Hills. You said Hocking Hills is in Ohio, and it's
Yeah.
a 3-day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday?
Yep. April 21st through 23rd this spring is the next one.
So is that open to people to participate in? They'd have to reach out to you, or you have a web page or
Yep.
Facebook group?
Wordsinthehills.com, and all the information and the registration is there. We still have spots open, but it is filling up. So it's a good time to get in on it. And then we have an Instagram account, just Words in the Hills.
Interesting. Very interesting. So when you were talking about going through the US, and I had no idea you stayed a month somewhere, but there was something mentioned about wanderings through the US. So that must have been part of going out west.
Yeah, I do. I tour all over the country with my music, and I definitely have slowed down during the past few years through the pandemic. But like last summer, I did a tour up through the Northeast, and played shows in upstate New York and Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and then down the coast. And so I travel. I mean, I've been to almost every state. I haven't played a show in every state, but I get around, and especially the Southwest. I've spent a lot of time touring through New Mexico, Arizona, California, and have I think I fell in love with traveling before I fell in love with the music part. And so it was already really part of my life. I was already traveling all over the country, visiting friends and working on farms. But then when I started becoming a professional musician, it's like, oh, I already do that part. I already do the touring. Now I can expand my connection with places by performing in these different places and getting to know people more and connecting with other musicians in different areas.
So how do you find your gigs? I mean, I know if at some point people start reaching out to you, but initially, did you Google coffee shops or?
Sure.
I don't.
Yeah, sure. And then just going to other events and meeting other musicians, and then who do I know in this town, and looking on Facebook, like, oh, my old friend so and so lives in that town. I can ask them what their town is like and where to play in their town. It's a huge networking. Who do I know who knows somebody who lives in this area? What musician lives over here that I've run into at a festival or a workshop? And then reaching out, and then sometimes just a simple Google search. There's online databases for finding gigs for musicians, so some folks use those. And just knowing people and meeting people and then connecting. And then I like to tell people, it's like every day you want to work as a musician, you have to apply. It's like filling out a job application for every single day that you want to work. So you send the email, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, these are the days I'm coming through. And then there's this whole negotiation. And so that's a lot of the behind the scenes work of it that people don't see when they see a show. It's like there's a lot of emails, a lot of time setting that up. And then once I've made a connection somewhere, of course, and it's like, hey, it's me again. Here's the days I'm coming through again. And then so just it gets easier with time.
I have a friend when I lived in Massachusetts that when she started doing that, she did a lot of couch surfing when she found friends. And is that part of your story as well? Is that you, you find a friend and, here's a couch you can stay tonight until you go to the next place. And is that part of it as well?
Yeah, definitely. And with musicians, it's, if I have a musician I know coming through my town, I will offer them a place to stay. And it's a very close-knit community and we support each other. And then I have a minivan that I took the back seats out. I have a full-size bed in the back of my minivan. And I mean, my background in environmental education, like I love to camp. And so I love just having somewhere to park my van out in the woods or in somebody's backyard. Or I love that part of it. I feel more connected with my environment when I get to sleep outside. And yeah, you make it work. And that is one of the really fun things I think about that kind of creative life is, you can't get to know people if you stay in a hotel, and that's more money. And if you stay with somebody, you get a little glimpse into their world. And as a writer, it's such an honor. And we need to talk to each other and share things and connect. And so, yeah, I would always choose to stay with somebody. And I have stayed with some pretty interesting people. And I definitely, especially early on, when I was just starting to make connections, I would literally say from the stage, if it was a place I'd never been before and didn't know anybody, like, hey, and I'm looking for a place to stay tonight. And I've been invited to some really interesting places and people I followed home who I thought, should I follow this person home? And then they end up being like the most interesting, nice person you could ever meet. And yeah, it's wild, it's risky, it's fun. And you definitely have to use your own internal compass and judgment. But yeah, I'm remembering this guy I met who was in the other band that played down in Houston. And I was kind of asking around for places to stay. And this guy, Craig, offered up his spot. He said, oh, yeah, like you can stay at our house. And then I asked around and the bartenders were like, oh yeah, he's a regular here. He's a good guy. And I go to follow him and he's got this very like fast sports car and he's just like whipping it around corners. And I'm like, should I be following this guy home? Like, this is like, I'm not really sure. And then, but I follow him to his house and I'm like, wow, he's like really driving really fast. And then we got to his house, we go in the first room and they're just like all these pictures and trophies of him racing cars. He was like a semi-professional race car driver. And then I met his lovely wife who was a dance instructor for kids. And they were so sweet and took me out to breakfast the next day. And yeah, but there's like that moment of like, wow, like this guy's driving erratically. Like, oh, he's a race car driver. So, and now we're buddies. And whenever I come to Houston, he'll come out to shows and he's a drummer for other bands. And so just like, yeah, having the opportunities to connect with people and step out of my comfort zone and learn something and open my mind and be a little less judgmental of the surface of people is kind of part of my spiritual practice too.
I have to say, I'm a product of the 60s and 70s. You sound quite like a hippie.
I've been called worse.
Well, the traveling and the outdoors, and that's what I mean by that. I mean it in a very nice way.
Yeah, thank you.
the whole concept of being a hippie has gotten a bad rap through the years anyway.
It's
So
true.
your genre, it's partly folk and partly Americana. Could you say
Mhm.
that?
Yeah.
But how could you describe for someone that doesn't know Americana? Because it's kind of a different genre that I've not always heard. But how is that different than folk?
Well, I think it mixes in a lot of different elements of country rock and blues. There was a breakaway. And if you watch the Ken Burns History of Country Music documentary, which I highly recommend, he talks about that breakaway of country music got kind of shoved into a hole where DJs were only allowed to play certain things. They didn't have as much freedom. So then you couldn't quite call some things country. And so outside of that, country was evolving. Country was getting more blues influence, more rock influence, more kind of indie influence. And that became Americana.
Interesting. You even know the history behind it. That is that's great. So you've been
Yeah, it's
playing in
funny that you say that because I've told my dad like that's what I play is Americana music, and he's like, "What's what is that? I never heard it. That's not a real thing." And then he watched that Ken Burns documentary, and he was like, "Hey, they mentioned Americana music on this Ken, so it must be real." I'm like, "Yes, it's real, Dad." Like, just like, yes, it is a thing, and that's how it happened.
so he thought you made it up.
I don't know. He just didn't think it was like a legitimate kind of music. Maybe it's like he didn't know what to tell his buddies. I don't know.
Well, maybe because people knew folk and he just said, "Oh, she does folk," because
Yeah.
everyone's heard of it. So you went from at a younger age, I really don't enjoy this performing part. And then you went to, you're doing gigs and you're, recording and you have videos out. How did you get from, I really don't like the performance part to here I am doing this?
I think part of it was that when I was performing as a kid, that was stuff I didn't believe in or didn't choose. It was chosen for me. It's for the choir, it's for church. Like me and my dad sang a duet in church once for Father's Day. I was probably like 8 or 9, and um it was so moving, for everybody in the audience. And of course, oh my God, like I would cry if I saw a little girl and her daddy singing a duet. And then after the church service, there was a little luncheon, and women came up and they're like, "Oh my gosh, like you made me cry. Like like you should sing more in church." And I just, that power of like, I made you cry. Like, I don't want to make people cry. And for me, I didn't feel moved. So I think it was scary, the fact that I could get up and do something that I knew I had talent with, but I wasn't feeling it. I maybe didn't quite believe the words I was singing. I didn't pick the song. It's just something I did as a favor for my dad. And then I made people cry. That was a lot to be responsible for as a little kid. That was like, it's like a power. I had felt like I had this power, but I wasn't using it the way I felt like I wanted to use it. It took a long time to grow into that, to be able to find my own voice and then feel comfortable sharing it in a public space. And so I kind of kept it for myself while I was learning my own path and my own voice. And then working at summer camps and working the environmental education programs constantly put me in a place where I got to perform, where I got to stand up in front of 100 kids and be very silly and be an entertainer. And that I loved. It was like, oh, I'm making people laugh, and I am, singing with this group, singing with these kids, and we're connecting. And it was more of a place that felt more me, more just excited and genuine to what I felt. And like I was in a position of power, and I was using it for a positive thing that I really believed in, which was to help these kids have a positive experience with their week away at camp and to connect with them and to laugh a lot with them. And so I got way more comfortable being in front of people. And then, around the campfire type stuff, singing other songs, it was more of a safe space to bring those in and try them out. And that's how I eased in to the performance side.
Well, then how did you go to start recording?
Oh, I I got immediately. Like I picked up a guitar. A week later, I played an open mic. I was like, oh, I know these 3 chords. I went with the friend that was teaching me and another friend, and we're like, oh, let's do this open mic. I immediately just like went into it. And then I think maybe a year later, I had written maybe like 6 or 7 songs, and I went and I knew somebody who had a little studio, and I had bought my guitar there and was like, oh, you have a little studio. And then I went back in and recorded some demos, and so I've just, it's kind of reckless. I just went in as like, oh, I have these songs, I'm going in. And so, I've recorded 4 solo albums as Megan B, and then 2 albums with my old band, Worms and the Decomposers, and then another demo that never got released. So I don't know, I just went for it.
So you do have a different name. I've known you as Megan B, but
Yeah,
how'd you come up with?
that's my stage name. That's the name I go by professionally.
Cool. So then videos. Okay, recording's one thing, and then videos is something completely different. So how did that come about?
Are you talking about a specific video, or
like, well,
it's hard not to be videoed as a musician. I feel like there's just
really,
it's kind of part of the job.
Well, I never thought of it that way. I know that there's some that are just lyric videos, or just the words with a background, and then you have where people have videoed you singing, and that's a different level as well. So you just had friends like, hey, I'm doing this song, will you record it?
Maybe, or sometimes I'll stick up. It's just, I think it's really important. If you're trying to reach new people, usually the first thing they'll look up is a YouTube channel. And if you don't have anything out there, then they won't get to see you or hear you. And maybe they will choose not to come to your show. So just try to put some stuff up and do some live recordings every once in a while. And sometimes I'll play venues where they record it. I definitely got a little into, when the pandemic happened and we all lost all our work, I did some more at-home recordings and did some more, kind of got into the production of music videos. So there was more in that period of time.
I always ask people, what words of wisdom would they give someone that wants to do what you're doing? And you've done a lot of different things. From your education in the ecotourism to your music and your teaching, and just what would you share with people?
It would really depend on what aspect they were interested in. But one thing I would say for all of them is to connect with other people who are doing what you want to do, and pick their brain and help them out. When I first started wanting to get into teaching and I wanted to move more from an environmental ed approach to a songwriting approach, I went out to Virginia and volunteered for a week with Kid Pan Alley, which is a group that songwrites and goes into schools and songwrites with kids. And I just wanted to understand the process and see it in action. So I went out there and volunteered and got to help them and got to learn a lot. So I would say find groups and people. And then as songwriter, just going to other songwriting events, I go to Rocky Mountain Song School in Colorado. Wow, if you are a songwriter who's listening who wants to dive headfirst into it, go to Rocky Mountain Song School in Colorado. It's a week long in the summer. And there are classes on the basics of songwriting. There are classes on that get very into depth, master classes on songwriting. And there are classes on business, on performance, creative process. It really covers a lot. I went there really early on when I was just learning guitar, and that really helped me get a foothold. Studied a lot with Pat Pattison, who is he teaches songwriting at the Berklee School of Music, and he is a great resource. He has written some amazing books on songwriting, and he has some online courses that are really accessible. So, and you can come to Words in the Hills in Southeast Ohio, April 21st through 23rd, and you will meet such a supportive group of writers of all genres, and get to hang out in a really supportive, beautiful place in the state.
Now, will that be Hocking Hills? Will people be camping, or are there cabins, or?
There's a bunkhouse that's open for anybody, and there's also an option if you want to camp in a tent. You can camp, and there's a shower house, and there's shower house in the bunkhouse, but there's another shower house outdoors for people who choose to tent camp. Or you can find your own lodging if you need more comfort. Or last year, a couple people commuted from home and just came for the days.
Mm. Now, this podcast is called Bloom Where You're Planted, and I always ask what that means to a person because it's different for everyone. So, what does that mean to Megan?
Yeah, I thought about this, and I love metaphor. I love working in metaphor. This is a hard one. As a farmer, as a background in farming, I know that not everything can bloom where it's planted. It takes a lot of care. As a farmer, you have to plant something in a place that has enough fertile soil and nutrients, has to have access to sunlight and enough water to bloom. And I think as a culture and as a country, there are a lot of seeds scattered in some very harsh environments. And not everybody gets the chance to bloom where they're planted. Not enough people are getting enough nourishment. They're not getting enough sunlight. They're not getting enough care. And so when you, I think for me, it triggers more of, it's so rough. It's like, we have these sayings of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or like make the best of your circumstances. But there are some people out there in some very, very hard circumstances. There are kids in abusive homes that are not going to bloom there. So for me, it's more of a challenge of like, God, let's try to help repot each other a little bit. Let's share some sunlight where we can, because I feel so blessed and lucky to have gotten to bloom into the person I am because of my privilege, because I have an education, because I am healthy. And there was a long time in my 20s, I didn't have healthcare. There wasn't access to healthcare. And I would have had a very different life if I had a chronic illness that I needed to be in a job with benefits so I could have that healthcare. I would have been down a totally different path. And so I think it's hard to bloom where you're planted for a lot of people. I was lucky. I was able to replant myself in lots of different situations. And so, yeah, it just makes me, I think a lot about just the suffering and the challenge of trying to bloom for a lot of people. So, if you see somebody who's definitely not going to bloom where they are, like helping people get in a better place where they actually can bloom, sending some sunlight their way, whatever we can do together, because I think our whole system is not really set up to help everyone bloom. Some people get lost in the shuffle or thrown in the cracks, and it's a big thing to try to say to somebody, to bloom where you're planted, but let's help each other. Let's try to nourish each other where we can. That's kind of my action.
I like that. And you're in around a lot of kids and a lot of environments that probably gave you some of that insight. So, well, Megan, it's been really great having you here today. And I want to say good luck to you with your Words in the Hills, and we'll help get the word out and share your information with that. It sounds like a great event. And so keep creating and keep being your creative, supportive person. And so I thank you again for being here. And so this is the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast, and it's sponsored by Never Too Late Cafe. I'm Laura Womack, your host, and I'm saying bye, Megan, and bye for now.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for making space and cheering on all the creative folks.